The Charlotte Hornets are all in on Lamelo Ball. Go figure, they should be. He was the Rookie of the Year. He's a dynamic playmaker, and he makes the team incredibly popular, not just with the Charlotte fans, but with the NBA fans in general. And honestly, I think they've had a good offseason. I think they've had a really good offseason, but I do have one major concern that I think was not fully addressed. It was slightly addressed, but I think that it could end up being a bigger problem than people understand. And I'll get into that in a minute, but I wanted to touch on the things they've done this offseason that I think have been really good moves. I think the first thing we should probably touch on is the draft. So they had their own pick at 11. They traded up to get number 19 and select Kai Jones. And also before the draft, they made a move to get Mason Plumlee in the 37th pick for the 57th pick. The trade for Mason Plumlee in the 37th overall pick was not necessarily the most widely accepted within the Hornets fandom. But the thing that I like about it is that they addressed a position of need. Their centers have always been terrible. Their centers rotation last year was Cody Zeller and Bismack Biyombo, which, as you can probably imagine, was maddening to have those two as your big men, rim runners, and screen setters for Lamelo Ball. He can at least be a presence at the rim that can put his hand straight in the air and not foul. Not to mention on offense, he has some playmaking. He has a little bit more rim running, better screen setting. He's a smart player. He actually fits what they need. So my guess is that they made that trade before draft night really even started, so that if someone were to fall to them at number 11, they could feel comfortable taking any position, any player, without feeling the need to urgently upgrade center because they did something about it. So that leads me into their actual draft. Number 11, James Bouknight, falls to them and has looked really good in Summer League. And what makes that even better is that Devontae Graham and Malik Monk were both going to be free agents. Whether it was restricted or unrestricted, the Hornets had to make that call. But they knew, at least somewhat, that they're going to need some depth at guard again, because that was one of their biggest strengths last year, was that they had LaMelo, Terry Rozier, Devontae, and Malik Monk. So they always had 4 somewhat productive guards available to them. So with that in mind, knowing that both of their futures were, let's just say, uncertain, they weren't sure exactly what was going to happen, they were able to select someone who should have gone higher than 11, and were able to fill somewhat of a need as well. Then obviously trading up for Kai Jones, that dude is an athletic freak. He's a 7-foot, almost, he reminds me kind of Pascal Siakam, but with some, I don't know exactly how to explain it, but almost some vicious Giannis trait to him. Not that I'm comparing him to Giannis, but his aggressive mindset and his just wanting to dunk on everybody, and just pure athleticism and skill at that size is unreal. Now, he's a project, so he's done some impressive things in Summer League, and he's needing a lot of work in some other areas in Summer League as well. Not sure if he's going to be a contributor right away, but he's a project well worth spending a protected first-round pick to go up and trade to get. Especially considering that center has been their biggest need for I can't tell you how many years, and the fact they're able to get a project with someone with such high upside at a position that you don't have any up-and-coming development projects or anyone promising, I think it was a great move. Great gamble. So now this gets me to my point of the video. The roster construction is actually really well put together because everyone on the roster is complementary to LaMelo. With guys like Miles Bridges, obviously signing Kelly Oubre, and then Kai Jones, you have these athletic vertical spacers who are just absolute monsters and want to dunk on everybody. You have your off-ball shooting and scoring with Terry. Miles has become really good. Gordon Hayward. Kelly Oubre started off his last year bad. He was like 1 for 20 something, but then he ended up becoming like a 35 or 36% shooter if you were to take his first 20 something attempts just out of the equation. And then obviously PJ Washington is a stretch big who can shoot the ball. And then James Bouknight, who was somewhat of a question mark coming into Summer League and saying, well, how much can he shoot? He looks so poised out there as an off-ball scorer and on-ball creator. So Bouknight is also someone that they've put around LaMelo to handle a little bit of the offensive ball handling and shooting. So when LaMelo is on the court, he will have a variety of lineups with guys who can space, who can jump, who can shoot, and who can dribble a little bit, which is just so perfect because the Hornets have never had a lot of depth, and especially not pieces that fit really well together. But it seems like this year, they've finally put together a roster that you can mix and match all sorts of different players with all sorts of different lineups, and if LaMelo's in it, he can make almost all of them work. That is what good organizations and good GMs and good coaching staffs are able to do around guys who have the kind of superstar trajectory, and I'm not kidding, that LaMelo has. Him always having people on the court with him who complement his game really well is how you build a winning organization, and they've taken a major step in that direction. But obviously, I don't think this roster is perfect. The center rotation could be better. I think that there could still be trades to make, but I have one big concern with the roster construction, which I know it sounds crazy. I just blushed all about this roster. But I do have one concern that I think has the potential to be a real problem for the team this season, and that's creation outside of LaMelo, when LaMelo sits. One thing that they've done a really nice job of is understanding that Hayward has an injury history. He's really good when he plays. He impacts winning when he plays. But when he's not playing, we needed depth. And last season, Jalen McDaniels was someone that needed to come in and step up. And no offense to Jalen McDaniels, I think he's actually a solid 3-and-D prospect. But now, they were able to put 4 quality NBA forwards on this roster, with obviously Hayward and Miles, and then behind him is Oubre and PJ Washington. If Hayward goes down, Oubre steps in, and not that there's going to be a seamless transition, but you don't lose the ability to win games putting Kelly Oubre instead of Gordon Hayward, and that is something they have not done with LaMelo. That's something that they were able to accomplish a little bit of with Devontae Graham last year, and Devontae was starting the year. Obviously, LaMelo ended up earning his start as a starter, but Devontae is a capable starter and an excellent backup point guard, and the Hornets have definitely downgraded in that area. With this kind of roster, if Devontae was still in this roster, when LaMelo sits, Devontae would be fine helping all these guys and orchestrating the offense. But understanding Ish Smith is not the type of half-court creation point guard. He's a transition pace setter, and that is one thing he'll be able to do, is continue the pace when LaMelo sits. But I really am worried about half-court creation, especially if, let's say that LaMelo were to go down with an injury, even if it's minor for a couple games, or even if it lasts a couple weeks, or even when LaMelo sits on the bench, when you don't have another option, another style of play. I think that outside of the transition game, I think the offense could potentially end up being a little bit ugly, and that's something that you're just going to have to deal with if that ends up being the case. But a couple good things here to end is that this is a deep team. Outside of, obviously, like I've said, style of play within the backup point guard and starting point guard, you're pretty deep at guard. I mean, you have LaMelo and then Ish Smith with Terry Rozier and James Bouknight, with Gordon Hayward and Kelly Oubre, and then Miles Bridges and PJ Washington, and then Mason Plumlee and potentially Kai Jones. I think that that's a really solid team that's locked in for 2 years. Everyone's on a 2-year contract or longer, except for Terry Rozier, which leads me to my other point, is that outside of Terry, this is a very young team that has a lot of room to grow internally, with LaMelo, PJ, Miles, Bouknight, Kai Jones, and then not to mention that they have tradable assets. Terry Rozier is on a 1-year expiring contract. Kelly Oubre is only making $12 million a year. Mason Plumlee is only making $8 million a year. And they have youngsters that they can put together to throw into these packages with draft picks and end up making pretty desirable trade packages to upgrade certain spots on the roster, or if a superstar wants out, they might could be able to put a pretty good bid in. So I think that this team is really well positioned going forward. I think that Lamelo is ready to take over these duties, and I think that this will be a turning point for the organization this year. And if all things go right, this should be the year that the Hornets finally get back into the playoffs and are there to stay.